Okay. Hi everyone, this is SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com, and I'm back with another video analysis. And this one is going to really expand on one I did last week, in which I talked about how a strong player, when they outplay a weaker player, very often it's done by having their pieces, they're continually going forward. They're driving their pieces forward, they're going into the opposing territory, they're finding good squares, and they're forcing their opponents to go backwards. I also touched briefly on how a good attacker always goes forward, even when it looks like he can't. And I wanted to go a bit deeper into that because I kind of rushed it. And so what I have done is I've picked up 5 random Mikhail Tal games. So everyone loves Tal, the master of attack, sacrifices like crazy, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to look at these games, not looking at them deeply, not in any way, but we're going to notice 2 things. First, we're going to notice how he always moves his pieces forward, right? He does not retreat. He's constantly moving forward. And 2, it's when you would expect him to retreat. That's when he unleashes his sacrifices, so very often. Now, these are just 5 random games that I pulled from near the beginning of his career. These are all in the early 1950s. They're not his masterpieces, they're just regular attacking games. And you can do this yourself. You can go to a database, look up his games, and see how often these 2 things go in. So we're just looking at these very briefly, just looking at these 2 ideas. So again, all these games, Tal is white, and we'll just go through this pretty quickly. And so he's just doing a normal developing his pieces, he's castling. He plays knight e5, and this is the first step. His pieces are never going to go backwards. That knight does not go backwards. He exchanges, that's fine. He's pushing his opponent back, so that way he can get ready to go forward. And the position we're going to look at is right here. This is the first position. Because we can see here, this knight, it is attacked twice. The queen and the bishop battery, it's attacking the knight. The knight's only defended once. It might think the knight has to move, or we have to defend it. Honestly, when I look at it quickly, my first thought is knight to d3, a retreat. But we don't want to retreat if we don't have to. Is there a better move? And there is. And this is, again, where the sacrifices come in. It's very often when you expect him to retreat, or you expect him to do, a do-nothing move like queen c3, it's where the tactics come in. Knight takes f7. And we can actually see how this is a pretty easy sacrifice to see. Because after, king takes, the bishop comes in, so you've got 2 pawns, the king's in a mess. Then after e5, queen takes h7. He's actually got 3 pawns for the piece. The king is completely, well, it's screwed. And Tal finishes the game off in just 4 more moves. And so if we look at this game, again, this was Tal to a T. He always moved his pieces forward. He never retreated. Again, if we just go through this quickly. Sorry, my desk here is rickety. His pieces go forward. Pieces go forward. Drive his opponent back. Pieces go forward. Pieces go forward. He's always moving forward. And then at the critical moment, when he might want to retreat, no. He goes forward again. And we can see how this just completely eviscerates black. And then in the final position, he resigns because, of course, the bishop is pinned. And after something like this, that's actually checkmate. Right? So do we see this? Is sometimes we always wonder, all right, how can we do these tactics? Or we can see tactics in a tactical puzzle, but it's hard to see it in our games. And again, so very often, you're moving your pieces forward. It's when you think that you might have to retreat, or when our opponent thinks he must retreat. That's where the tactics lay. This is just the first example. Again, we're going to see this over and over again. Let's look at the next example, which is actually, it's interesting because the computer thinks that white's just losing up until a blunder on move 17. Anyway, so this is Tal versus Igor Zhdanov's. And this is the Belgrade Gambit, an opening that I played around with a little bit. And so white sacrifices a pawn, but he doesn't actually get a heck of a lot for it, in all honesty. And the computer already thinks that black is doing a little bit better. And he kind of is. This isn't the best gambit in the world. But anyway, if we notice, up till now, he hasn't retreated a single piece. Pushes his opponent back, pushes his opponent away, pushes forward. And if we get to the critical position is right here. So if you back up, we notice what happened over the last 5 moves is that, again, he's thinking about attack the entire way. He played a gambit. He's slowly moving his pieces towards the king side. And we can see that. Queen d2, and then queen f4, and then it's here. His opponent blunders. He misses the threat. He plays c4. Now this makes a lot of sense because we're attacking the bishop. There isn't really a safe square anywhere for the bishop. If the bishop is forced to go back to e2, that's one less attacker. This is where, again, we want to think. Not necessarily. Our first instinct isn't, where should I retreat my bishop? Where does it have to move? Rather, it's, can I move my pieces forward? And there's actually a relatively simple yet brilliant tactical idea. And it's bishop f6. So it's not necessarily the piece that's attacked that is always going to be doing the tactic. It can be another piece entirely. If we can see, the threat is actually pretty simple, is that if it's take, well, the simple threat of check and then checkmate, and there's no way to stop that. If he tries to move the rook out of the way, for instance, well then, whoops, not that. We come in with queen h6 then, and we're threatening both check and checkmate here. And so with this bishop f6 idea, he's in trouble. And again, if he doesn't take it, again, there's also the threat of just bringing the queen in here, using the pin, and that's checkmate. In the game, black tried bishop d8, so that way he can try to exchange off this piece. And this is where the second sacrifice comes in, or the first real one. And all of a sudden, it's a standard. He wins the queen, and the game continues for a couple more moves. But at that point, it doesn't really matter. So again, if we look at this game, not terribly well played, in all honesty. If you're to look at that, analyze it with the computer, at least. This is a speculative gambit in which white does not really get enough compensation. However, black underestimates the white's attacking idea. And that makes perfect sense, because we look at c4, and in our heads, we often think, okay, the bishop has to go somewhere. Or maybe I'll sacrifice here, but there's no follow-up. We'll be okay. It's that second threat. Or rather, it's when you think that we need to retreat, that we don't. It's bishop f6, and then that paves the way for the successful bishop takes h7 sacrifice. Interesting line also is that if the king were to move here, the exact same follow-up works. Knight g5, queen moves somewhere. This time we go over with queen h4, and there's going to be discovered, check, threat, mate, right there. So again, I'm not trying to analyze this too deeply into the tactics. Honestly, I haven't really done that. I've simply looked at it in general, and we can see that. White moves his pieces forward, and instead of retreating, he looks deeper to see there's a tactic. And very often, there are. Or there's at least something that's interesting, that's worth looking at. Let's look at the next one. So this next one is Tal versus Ivo Nye, if I'm saying the name right. This is actually from a Blitz tournament. We all know Tal's Blitz. And this is a really vintage Tal. Probably the game that he just loved playing, especially in Blitz, where he's sacrificing, again, a pawn from the opening. This is the Milner-Bernier Gambit. And it's actually both pawns. And in exchange for that, he, of course, gets open lines and a huge lead in development. To the point where he's able to win one pawn back because of the pin, but then he gives it right back up here. And we can see, let's just go one more move. h6, queen takes g7, rook g8. Right here. Where things are, well, they're simply crazy. And queen takes f6 is one possibility. However, we do have to be careful because there's a rook and the queen, sorry, the rook and the bishop are eyeing g2. They're going to be setting up checks, perpetual checks, perhaps discover double checks, eyeing through the pawn. Knight come to g4 potentially. Like, this could be a scary situation. And so you need to calculate accurately, and it's blitz. At the same time, we're not necessarily thinking, do I have to move the queen? We're thinking, how do we improve our pieces? How can we move forward? How can we get everything into the attack? And Tal was able to find rook takes e6. Pawn takes e6, and that allows this check. And notice that what this means was, well, one, now we take the knight with check, but also the bishop is interfering the rook and the bishop's battery here on the g2 pawn. It's blocked. There is no counterattack. This bishop is hanging. He's in check. Obviously, he's in huge trouble, and the game is simply over at this point. It's going to be forced mate, I believe. Wow. And so again, this is another example in which Tal was willing to sacrifice pawns. Right in the opening, he plays gambits. And by the way, if you want to, there's a lot of people that want to play like Tal, that want to play like Morphy, to get into the same, everyone wants to be immortal with those fantabulous sacrifices. And a good way to do that is to play gambits, because you're literally sacrificing pawns in the opening. You're putting yourself in good positions. And if you're not willing to sacrifice a pawn, right, for Tempe, then will you ever have the nerve to sacrifice a piece? It has to start somewhere. And so if you want to play like the greats, well, play openings like the greats. Sacrifice from the very beginning and see what happens. I, for one, always said, I want to sacrifice like Tal. I want to be like Morphy. But I never wanted to give up pawns. I would never play a gambit. But how can I be a sacrifice like my heroes if I won't even sacrifice a lonely little pawn? Once I started playing a few gambits, that gave me a lot of courage to, sacrifice more. And it also told me that I wasn't very good at sacrificing, so maybe I should hold off and play more like Capablanca or Karpov. But anyway, if we see this, pieces moving forward. Once again, Tal never retreats. Even here, all right, queen takes f6. It's not really a retreat, but the queen is moving backwards. He's thinking moving forwards the entire time. Rook takes e6. A lovely intermezzo. And the game is over. So we see that if we can move our pieces forward, and we don't think about retreating, we always think going forward, that's going to help us find these tactics. We've got two more. So this game is Tal against Giza Fuster. Is a Canadian. Interesting. Anyway, if you look at the game, again, this one's actually interesting because it's a bit more speculative in nature, or it's not immediately obvious what Tal gets. We see up until now, everything makes perfect sense, and this is actually the first retreat we actually see Tal make in any of the games so far, where he's moved his bishop back, because there is no good sacrifice here. There's nothing to do, and otherwise you lose the bishop. And so it's not a case in which you can always just move forward, damn the torpedoes at all costs. You have to calculate, right? But very often it's there's more choice than we think there is. Is the obvious retreat isn't necessary. Here's actually a good example where it's he just plays g4 and the game starts getting a little bit crazy. And the position is right here. And so he just played f6. Obviously our knight is attacked. Our knight needs to move, yes? Well, if you've got this far here in the video, then no. Or that shouldn't necessarily be our first instinct. Is there anything else we can do? And if we notice that the black king is in the center, and if you were to take, then the center is starting to open up, is that worth a piece? And this is where you have to use your imagination a little bit, your creativity. I'm not sure if you can just calculate all these lines for the next 10 moves. Maybe Tal did, maybe he didn't, I don't know. But if we just look at what Tal did instead, is he took on e6 with the idea of f takes e5, d takes e5, the bishop moves, and then rook f1. And we can see that the black king is never going to castle. It's never going to be safe. And the center is wide open. All of white is active, whereas black is playing without either rook. So even though white is down a piece, well, one, he's got 2 pawns for the piece, that's always good. But if black isn't playing with a rook, either rook, then in a way white is up a piece, depending how you look at it. And even here, rook f8, take, exchanging. It doesn't slow white down at all. Brings his queen up, slides the queen over, and then here after bishop d7, it seems that black is compelled to give up his queen. He goes queen takes d7, and then white's able to slide in, and here's where black finally resigns. And if we back up at this position, was there anything else? Well, we'll see if we don't take the bishop. If the king were to move over, we can see that he's ripe for discover check here. So bishop f5, let's say king c7, well now rook d7, and we're going to get the queen regardless. In fact, I believe it's the exact same variation. So there we go. And so again, another game. Tal, again, he actually moved backwards in this point. Sometimes you have to move backwards, but that's fine. And it was right here. Again, if you're anything like me, your first instinct is to move the knight. But sometimes we have to override our instincts. We have to think harder. And this is really where some creativity comes in. It's probably not possible to calculate all 10 moves ahead. Maybe it is, I don't know. I couldn't calculate those 10 moves. Not in a position like this. Not for this unclear compensation. But yet it's very clear, because we can see that his king is stuck in the center. It's stuck. It's wide open. White is very, very active. His king is safe. There's no counterattack. Black is playing without rooks. And white was able to come in. And it didn't take anything fancy. Right? He just moved his queen, and all of a sudden bishop d7 is an overpowering threat. We got one more game to look at. And this last one, this is Tal versus Zdravko Milev. I have the year here. I don't have the year, I'm sorry. And I think this is my favorite game. Obviously, you always save the best for last, but just because this is a move I would never even think about playing. I don't think so, at least. Maybe now that I've seen it, I would. And so, pretty standard, again. Tal's moving forward. Actually, interesting is so often is that, positionally we want to keep the bishop. And so, we would retreat it. And yet, if you want to be a dynamic, active player, very often exchanging is better. For an interesting reason, actually. If you allow me this digression, is that if this bishop were to move, say go back to bishop e2, say, now it's black to move, and he can do something, say bishop e7 himself, he's developing, things are normal. So that is, by retreating, we're giving our opponent the move. So if we were to back up, then he gets to go. When we take, and then he takes, it's our move again. And so instead of giving our opponent a move, we're keeping the tempo. And we can actually see what's happened here in the position Tal did take, of course. Sorry, in case that wasn't clear. Is that if we were to back up, if we were to retreat, and then we go here, he has 3 pieces developed, we have 3 pieces developed. Instead, by exchanging, and then we castle, but we've got 2 pieces developed and we've castled, he has 1 piece developed. And so it's true we want to keep our bishops, in general, but very often be able to exchange was going to give us that extra time needed. And we'll see what happens. Bishop b7, the knight comes forward. Notice how he's making a retreating move. Whenever our opponent retreats, that's usually a good sign for us. Knight jumps in, take. He's forced to move his king, so now his king is stuck in the center. And here's the start, in all honesty. d5, take, and it's right here. So first off, let me just say that being able to find d5 itself is a fantastic, fantastic idea, right? Opening the position up. But then it's right here. We have to figure out what to do. Obviously, our knight's attacked. We're down a pawn. He can't castle, so that's very good. And so our first instinct might be, we move the knight somewhere, say, g3, we'll play rook e1, and then get ready to do discovered attack. That makes perfect sense, and that might even be possible. But Tal finds something better. And honestly, it blows me away, being able to just be able to think like this. It's where he just plays rook fe1. He ignores his knight, and he's putting his rook on an open file, but his own 2 pieces are in the way. It blows me away. Holy cow. And again, what's the idea? We don't immediately think about retreating the knight, even though it makes perfect sense. Our guiding idea, our thought is, how can we make our pieces better? All of them. And obviously we want to put a rook on e1. Of course we do. He can't castle, of course. He's already moved his king. And in the game, if we just look what happened in the game, is that he declined the sacrifice. He plays king d8, and then white still offers the knight. This time it's a bit more obvious, because if you're to take, the other rook is able to slide over, and it looks like bad things are going to be happening to the black king. And after c5, we had take, 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 and it's here, in fact, in which black actually resigned. White isn't even down material. It looks like checkmate is going to happen very, very quickly. For instance, if the queen were to retreat here, try to move the queen, well, that's simply mate. Rook c8 makes some sense, because now the queen is still covering the square. However, after something like rook a to c1, again, if the queen were to move, well, okay, if it goes there, we're going to take it. That's pretty easy. If the queen tries to do something like this, that's mate. And the one tricky idea would be rook e8, because now if, whoops, and if, lots of things win in all honesty, but we can take with check, and then even just this, we have a piece. So that's great. But of course, critically, if we were to go back, we need to figure out what happens if d takes e4. Because after queen takes e4, bishop e7, bishop c5. And now look at that. By this one move, we've unblocked the e-file. Now, there's 3 things attacking the bishop. There's no other way to defend it. We can't add anything. We can't block anything. And it's complete destruction. Coming right in. So it's actually fairly simple, if you look at it. If we back up, also possible to be something like queen e7 instead. But then we can move the queen. I like c4 better. And now the threat is to move the bishop, and it's going to be discovered pin on the queen. The only way to get around that would be to try and move the king. After something like this, again, we can see that white has got a terrific compensation. If not, it's just winning immediately. So this was the idea behind the tactic. And again, how do we discover it? We have to override that idea of immediately retreating. We don't need to retreat. That shouldn't be our goal, is necessarily to save material. Our goal is to have our pieces as active as possible, to move them forward if we can. And if you think that way, and you're incredibly creative, maybe you can see things like this rook e1, which is just, to me, maybe it's simple to you, but to me it's absolutely fantastic. Fantastic. And it's similar with all the other examples. We don't need to automatically retreat, necessarily, especially in the more tactical the position is, the more dynamic, the weaker the enemy king. That's when we want to dig in. Don't retreat unless it's necessary, because one of the biggest... when I play the lower-rated players, sometimes they challenge me to matches, or it's coaching, or whatever it is, it's unnecessary retreats. Like, even here, it looks like, retreat is completely justified, and it probably is. But be able to go dig deeper, to find something, to move our pieces forward, to go forward even in the face of, adversary, sacrificing material. This is so often where it starts. So hopefully that helped. Hopefully that expanded on the my previous video when it really shows the tactical implications of this idea. Moving our pieces forward. Forward, forward, forward. And good things can happen. And if you look up at your favorite tactical game, your favorite masterpieces, so often you'll see this. It's when we expect our opponent to retreat, that's when the sacrifice, that's where the tactics come in. And if we can sense this, if we can develop a feeling to spot it, that's when we can start using it in our own games, and that's a pretty cool feeling. So that's that. SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com. Leave a comment, or you can like, subscribe, do all that. That'd be great. Hopefully this is a clearer and expanded on my old video. If there's still questions, comments, let me know. And otherwise, that's that. All right. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.